Greetings and welcome to the Cancer Interviews podcast. I'm your host, Bruce Morton, and thanks for joining us. Every cancer journey is different depending upon who was diagnosed, their medical history, the point in which their cancer was detected, and the type of cancer involved. A lot of variables. Well, our guest on this segment is Carol Lacey of Boulder Creek, California. She has survived recurring cervical cancer, metastatic recurring cervical cancer, and she's our first guest to have been on a journey with cervical cancer. So we're going to learn a little bit about her story, and we're going to learn a little bit about cervical cancer. So Carol, welcome to Cancer Interviews.
Well, thank you, Bruce. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you.
Well, we know that you are a patient and a survivor, but we also know that you're a person. And so we always want to start off with learning more about our guest as a person. So if you would, Carol, tell us a little bit about where you're from, what you've done for work, and when there's time for fun, what you like to do for fun.
Sure. Well, I am a native of Northern California. In fact, I was born and raised in Silicon Valley. I work in high tech. And when I'm not working, I spend a lot of time with my family and friends, hiking, going to the beach, and just enjoying the beautiful weather that we have here in California.
So if you've been in high tech for a long time, I'm guessing that you've seen high tech change its face, its nature between the time when you started and the present. Is that fair to say?
Oh my goodness, yes. In fact, living in this valley, I watched it go from orchards to semiconductor companies, and I grew up within within high tech. My parents were high tech workers early on in the 60s, and so I have watched it evolve and have been fortunate to be in some cutting edge companies that helped made it what it is today.
Now, let's talk about your cancer journey. I am guessing, and if I'm wrong, then you can correct me, but I'm guessing that you were in fairly good health prior to being diagnosed. Is that fair to say?
I sure was. I'm 46 years old. I led a very active life. I had raised 2 kids. My kids were young adults at the time of my diagnosis, which was in 2011. Life was really good prior to being diagnosed with cervical cancer. So it was quite a shock. As you know, cancer diagnosis is pretty heavy and pretty life-altering.
Now, when did you notice that something was abnormal, something that demanded medical attention, and what was it?
So for me, what I thought I was experiencing was pre-menopausal symptoms. I had, some discomfort during sexual intercourse, and I thought, well, maybe it's just, the onset of pre-menopause. So I had made an appointment with a new gynecologist. And as many women in your audience know, gynecological, appointment isn't the best day, but it is hugely important. And during that, during my appointment, my gynecologist said that she sees a mass. And so she immediately biopsied that mass. And I received a call about 4 days later from her saying that mass was indeed cervical cancer. So, I just remember crying. I'm not even sure if I said anything to her because I was just in shock. She gave me the name and the number of an oncologist. She said, he's expecting you within the hour. I immediately called my fiance at the time, and I think all that I could actually say was, I have cancer. Meet me at this doctor's office. And life just went super fast after that. I had a radical hysterectomy. I had some pre-surgery chemotherapy to try to shrink that tumor. And then after my hysterectomy, I had to have some post-surgery chemotherapy and radiation because we found a lymph node that was cancerous. So that was a whirlwind of 3 months, right?
I would say so. And my question for you is, once you got that horrific news, what was your vision of what would have to be done during treatment over and above radiation and chemotherapy?
Well, I think that I just thought a lot about life, how I was living life, what my future was going to hold. Was I going to still be here? Was I going to be able to watch my children get married and start their families? So a lot goes through your head during that time prior to getting ready for surgery or chemotherapy or whatever the treatment is going to be for you as a cancer patient.
Now, in terms of things that that might have led to this tumor, we've heard that something that can play a role in cervical cancer was the human papilloma virus. Did that play a role, and to what extent?
Yes, absolutely. So in 2009 was the first time that during my cancer screening, that Pap test that anyone with the cervix has, came back positive for HPV. I didn't know anything about HPV at the time, so my doctor just simply said it's an incredibly common virus that almost every adult will have at some point in their lifetime. And most people, the virus just works itself out of the body. But for some people like myself, the virus was very persistent, and it is what caused my cervical cancer.
Now, when it came to treatment, as we mentioned at the top, each cancer is different, and each specific cancer can provide the person who's been diagnosed either with a number of options, or perhaps there's no option at all. There's just one route to go. Did you have treatment options? If so, what were they?
I did. Well, I really put my trust into my oncologist. He had recommended the radical hysterectomy for the best immediate, plan of action. And then again, after that radical hysterectomy, when we did find that one of the lymph nodes was cancerous, that's when he put me back into chemotherapy, and then we did some more external radiation for my cervical cancer. Some women who are diagnosed with cervical cancer have internal radiation. I was not one of those people, thankfully. It's quite a horrendous treatment, if you can imagine. But, external radiation and chemotherapy was quite enough. And then about 10 months after that surgery, I had a reoccurrence. So at that point, my oncologist tells me that one of my only options is to have what's called a total pelvic extrination. I absolutely had to Google this, but what a pelvic extrination is it's removing many of your organs within your pelvic cavity. So my bladder, my colon, my anus, my vagina, everything was removed. So I like to say I'm sewn up like a Barbie doll, and I have what's called ostomies. So I live with a urostomy and a colostomy, if you're familiar with those. Basically, they're bags that carry my waste instead of, having it the normal way.
Now, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Carol.
Oh, I was just saying it was a lot to kind of process within that first 10 months of being diagnosed. It's kind of like just a whirlwind, really.
Now, we want to remind you as you hear this segment, if you like what you hear from this interview or any of our interviews, we invite you to subscribe to our podcast by clicking on the links below. Once there, you will see a bell icon, and if you click on that, we will notify you when we post a new interview. Now, Carol, a lot of people have their plate full with just one procedure similar to this long list that you mentioned. But what was tougher for you, the removal of each of these organs, or just the thought that came with?
It was just the overall thought. I mean, the first thing that popped into my head was, these are a lot of things that, I attributed to being a woman, right? And knowing that those are going to be removed, I imagine, a breast cancer patient would also go through this as well. But you start to think that, wow, everything that I thought made me a woman is kind of going to be taken away from me. So a lot of that, but once I realized, nope, I'm still who I am. I still have a life to live, and now, I'll just be living it slightly different.
All right, I want to go through some of the things that you experienced. First of all, just the chemotherapy, and I feel silly by putting the word just in front of it, but I mean it just that only. What was the toughest part of your chemotherapy journey?
So I think toughest part for me was probably, I thought initially it was going to be the loss of my hair, but I kind of thought, after it happened, after I let it go, I ended up shaving my head, and it was a little empowering after that point, saying that I'm going to take, cancer is putting me in this position, but I'm going to take something back by shaving my head. I think what ultimately ended up being the hardest thing for me are the side effects from the chemotherapy. Right now, I'm battling with tinnitus, which is something directly related to the cisplatin and the carboplatins that I had during my initial treatment, and then again after my third reoccurrence, where I had a bit more of that cisplatin. So knowing that now I'm only 56, but I'm getting hearing aids, and I have a tremendous loss of hearing because of that. So I think it's just the side effects that are long lasting, they're forever. When you have chemotherapy and radiation, those things sometimes don't go away, unfortunately.
Well, one of those things I was going to ask about, because we've heard about this many times with other guests we've had who underwent chemotherapy, and that is what's known not so affectionately as Chemo Brain. Has that manifested itself with you, like loss of memory, sharpness, that sort of thing?
Oh, gosh, yes. I thought I was kind of, scattered prior to cancer, but after cancer, boy, oh boy, yes. And many in our, cervical cancer community also talk about chemo brain, or what we like to call chemo fog too. It is just something that, yep, you have to deal with.
Are there any ways that you can combat that? In other words, we have one guest who will use her cell phone or iPad to make mental notes of this and that she has to do tomorrow or next week or something like that. And the cell phone or iPad helps her to remember that sort of thing.
Yes, absolutely. I can't imagine my life without my devices, my phone, my iPad. It all helps to keep me on track. Those little, because you can have little ping reminders that, or your calendar reminders, all super helpful in making sure that you're not forgetting all of those special, important things that you have to get done on your to-do list or your appointment calendar.
Okay, now you'd mentioned the ostomy, not a pleasant subject, but it's something that is now part of your life, whether you like it or not. How difficult was it on two fronts? Number one, how difficult was it just learning how to maintain it? Because I suspect if you maintain it yourself, that's something you have to do 3 or 4 times a day.
Yes, living with ostomies was quite a challenge. I think the first year I really struggled. Thankfully, I had a partner that was my caregiver. He was incredibly helpful when it came to just learning about how to manage my ostomies. I had an ostomy nurse prior to my surgery and just after my surgery who helped kind of recommend, different products that are great. And I also found online communities. There's great groups on Facebook and other social media platforms that are there just for ostomites, anyone living with an ostomy. I have 2 ostomies, which is not as usual as perhaps one ostomy. So it's, it has its own struggles and its own challenges. But I do everything that I did prior to my ostomy surgery. I swim, I hike, I hot tub. I enjoy my life just as much as I did prior to cancer and prior to being an ostomite.
I think you've already answered my next question, but I'll answer it anyway in case there's some blanks that need to be filled in. At any time, was there ever any emotional trauma for you in trying to incorporate the ostomies into your regular everyday life?
Absolutely. I still have days where I'm frustrated if I have a leak or if, something goes wrong. I remember when I first came back to work, I was sitting in a meeting, a room of about 20 people, and my ostomy, a colostomy, it makes noises, it passes gas, but unlike someone who has an anus where you can kind of clench and hold in that fart, you can't do that with a colostomy. And so there I was in this meeting, and my ostomy decided to be very vocal. It was a little embarrassing. I don't think anyone knew it was me, but it's those kind of moments that can be a little challenging. And but now I just kind of look at it, I just roll with it, right? We all have embarrassing moments in life, whether you have ostomies or not. So it just happens.
You had mentioned hiking, swimming, all these everyday sort of things. In what areas can you not do what you used to do? It sounds like so many facets of your everyday life are intact, or as you said, sewn together. But in what areas are you less than 100%, or what areas will you just not be able to resume that again? I
have yet to come up to face something that I haven't been able to do with my ostomies. I'm not quite as comfortable wearing a, slinky white dress maybe, because just from, I'm a little self-conscious about that, but everything else that I want to do, that I have done in the past, I move forward and do it. And nothing is stopping me, especially not my ostomies. So, and I think a lot of people who live with ostomies feel that same way.
Well, you sound, Carol, like you're so self-sufficient in so many ways, and yet I've got to believe that that support has helped you along the way. And if you would elaborate a little bit more on what your partner or family or friends have done to try to make this very difficult situation not quite as difficult.
Well, I have been very, very lucky that I have such a great support system. I have amazing friends who are family. I have my family, my partner, my husband. I can't even begin to say how important it is to have that sense of support. Prior to my cancer diagnosis, even through my cancer diagnosis, and now into just living my life, that plays such a role in keeping you focused and positive. Just having all that great energy really helps a lot. And for me, I also found a great cervical cancer support organization called Survivor, and that's spelled CERVIVOR. And it is an amazing organization that I happened upon around 2016 when I was reading an article about the founder of Survivor. Her name is Tamika Felder, and how she was a 16-year cervical cancer survivor. And I thought at that time, wow, I had yet to meet another cervical cancer survivor during my cancer journey. And I was just elated to find this website. I immediately went on there and I started reading these stories of women who were so much like me, with HPV diagnosis, cervical cancer. Some were moms, some were not moms. I felt like I had found my community. And the one thing that Survivor has also given me is that patient advocacy voice, because now my cancer journey doesn't have to just be my cancer story. It's also a platform for me to share about cancer prevention, about HPV, about how my cancer can be prevented. So, it was a huge, having that type of support and that type of knowledge has been incredibly helpful in my journey, for sure.
Our guest on this segment is Carol Lacey of Boulder Creek, California. She is a survivor of metastatic recurring cervical cancer. And Carol, let's talk a little bit more about Survivor. What are some of the things that you do? Because it sounds like it's a two-way street. Survivor has helped you, and now you're trying to help Survivor and the Survivor with a C family.
Yes, absolutely. Well, again, cervical cancer diagnosis, there's so many things that can go with it because it is linked to HPV. A lot of times people feel like there's a stigma around that diagnosis because HPV is a sexually transmitted infection. There can be that stigma. Below the belt cancers are just in general very hard for people to talk about. I know when I was first diagnosed with cancer, everybody I met immediately thought I had breast cancer. And then when I shared with them, no, it was cervical cancer, I got lots of interesting, I don't understand. There wasn't a whole lot of knowledge just about cervical cancer in general. So the one thing that Survivor does is make sure that we educate cervical cancer patients and survivors about our own diagnosis. What does that mean? What is cervical cancer? What can we expect for patients? And really to kind of, take that knowledge, go out into our communities and share that information with people that, having your cancer screening visits are incredibly important. Don't miss them. Making sure that you're vaccinating your children, boys and girls, and that, we can't have, we have the ability to prevent not just cervical cancer, but 5 other cancers that also affect men as well. HPV is a very prevalent virus, and we know that it causes these cancers, and we can prevent it. So anything that I can do during my life to prevent someone else from having to have a cervical cancer diagnosis, I will definitely do it.
Now, before we go any farther, there could be somebody watching or listening who would be interested in contacting Survivor. And how might they do that?
Oh, they can reach out to us. We have on our website, it's survivor.org. So it's CERVIVOR.org. They can reach out they can send an email to info@survivor.org. And we're on every social media platform, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Just search for Survivor and you will find us.
Carol, for just about everybody who's been diagnosed with cancer, this applies to you, and this applies to me as a prostate cancer survivor as well. There's sort of this interim between the time in which you hear you might be a candidate for a certain cancer and then the dreaded day when you hear the diagnosis. For people who are in that interim, for lack of a better word, what can Survivor do for them?
Well, Survivor can definitely give them the tools. We have a great resource. Our website is filled with information about cervical cancer, HPV, and other resources that support anyone with a cancer diagnosis, not just cervical cancer as well, but it's a great place to start to find that information. And also, the American Cancer Society is a great resource for anyone who's been newly diagnosed. I know that was one of the first websites I went to when I was diagnosed with cancer. There are a lot of resources out there today, which I'm super grateful for because I know it wasn't always the case, 20 or 30 years ago.
Carol, now there's an unspoken part of your cancer journey that I want you to speak about, and that is that I've seen a video of you on the Survivor website, and we spoke a bit off the air, if you will, before we began our interview, and now there's the interview itself, and there's one theme that has remained consistent with you, and that is that in the face of all this, in the face of all the organ removals, all the things that you have to deal with on a daily basis that so many people don't have to deal with, through all of that, what has shined through and what has been consistent is that you maintain a sunny disposition. How do you do it?
Oh, goodness. Not every day is sunny and perfect, but I have to say that the story that came to me, especially during my reoccurrence, was a memory of my great Aunt Anna, who was a wonderful woman in my life, and I was very grateful to have grown up with her. But anytime anyone would ask her age, she would always say, "Honey, I stopped counting the years and I only count my sunny days." I thought that was just about the best response that any woman could possibly give. And so I remember when I was going into surgery for my pelvic extrinsion, I remember her voice in my head just saying, "More sunny days, more sunny days." And that became my mantra. From that moment on, I decided that no matter what, I'm living for more sunny days. In fact, I even had it tattooed on my arm as my mantra. And, I just feel like a cancer diagnosis is so devastating that, you just want more sunny days, whatever that day entails, right?
And you have taken that mantra and shown that that mantra is not just words, you have put it into action. And it seems like you're doing it on an ongoing basis, maybe not every day, but pretty close to every day. Now, at this point, Carol, we're going to start to wrap things up. And as is the case in which we start our interviews from the same place, we like to end from the same place. Some of your answer to this question could be material you've already covered, but in this situation, being redundant is not necessarily a bad thing. So imagine if you have encountered someone in person or online, someone who has either just been diagnosed with cervical cancer or they're in that interim, they're a candidate. And if you had a message for them, if there's one overarching point that you would like our audience to take and remember, what would that point be?
Well, I think the first thing is that you are not alone. There are so many support organizations, support resources out there for you, no matter what your cancer diagnosis is. If it happens to be a cervical cancer diagnosis, I'm here for you. Survivor is here for you. You don't have to go through this alone. I think that's the overriding message that I could say to anyone newly diagnosed with any type of cancer.
And those are wise words to carry forward, as are your great Aunt Anna's. Her message is one that, maybe we don't have to get it tattooed, but we should remember it. So
we should.
Carol, that's going to wrap it up. Thank you very much for your time and a message that is informative, but also just the way that you've dealt with everything is an inspiration to anybody who's watching or listening. So, Carol, thanks very much for your time. Thanks for being with us on Cancer Interviews.
Thank you, Bruce. Have a great day.
You too. That's going to wrap up this segment of Cancer Interviews. Thanks again, Carol. And we hope what you heard can aid the cancer journey for you or for a loved one. So until next time, we'll see you on down the road.
Thanks for joining us today. For more information, please visit us online at cancerinterviews.com. We appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you back here again next time on the Cancer Interviews Podcast.